of Law. This is Dan Contrell, the Systems Group Manager at Duke University School of Law. And we're going to talk about virtualization today and how you can use virtualization to streamline your data center, provide some better services to your clients. So, just a brief introduction. Both Dan and I have been using virtualization in different capacities at our schools. We're both intricately involved with planning and implementing virtualization for our law schools. And so we got together and decided we would do a presentation today. And we're not saying that we know the most about virtualization. I'm sure there's people in the room that have started doing things. But what we're trying to say today is that if you're not doing virtualization, we're trying to hopefully ask some questions, why aren't you? And get people to start thinking about how virtualization really can benefit you, even if you're going with a free solution, and the ways that it really can impact the things that you're doing for your services and for your clients. We're going to talk about some terms real quick just to get people familiar. If you haven't done anything with virtualization, we'll give you a brief overview of the agenda.
Real quickly, just talking about the basic terms today. Virtualization is about taking an operating system and running it in an encapsulated form on a virtual host. Hypervisor is the central software, the kernel that's going to be running and allowing you to do this feature. The VMI is a common instruction communication standard that allows the guest operating system to talk through to devices and hardware. And then para-virtualization, which you'll probably see a lot of in literature, is one form of abstracting the hardware from that guest operating system. And it's displaying some characteristics of the real hardware, but not all of the characteristics of the real hardware. And the bare metal is what the hypervisor is running on, and the requirements of the physical hardware to accomplish this. And then live motion is actually taking this encapsulated guest operating system, being able to move it around in a live state without interrupting its regular cycles, regular CPU cycles. Virtual snapshots we'll also be talking a lot about is an extensive feature that can do a lot of things for you. It's taking a point-in-time instance of a running virtual machine, a host operating system, and saying, I want to remember this. I can go back to it later. I can export it, duplicate it, make templates out of it. A lot of uses we're going to talk about this snapshot and taking just a point-in-time image of a running machine and then all the features that we can then use it for.
So just a quick agenda. We're going to go over in depth the benefits of virtualization, what value add is, how you can use it for your school, and what the different technologies give you. We're going to do a brief, actually probably a relatively extensive case study from UC Davis talking about what we did there using VMware infrastructure. And then we're going to go over some advanced topics, disaster recovery, things like that. And then Dan's going to talk about a case study from Duke and what they did. And then we're going to hopefully end early so that we can have a really in-depth question and hopefully discussion. Everybody talk about what people are doing, if there's any apprehension to you doing virtualization, and hopefully just kind of have a really good discussion afterwards. So the benefits. Utilization. If you look at your servers in general, I know my servers, when I did an analysis before we started our virtualization project, we were getting anywhere from 0 to 5% utilization on every single server. I didn't have any servers that were above 5% utilization on average. So that means that 95% of the hardware is just sitting there twiddling its thumbs the whole time. It's not a very good use of the hardware. We keep buying multiple servers to throw at different services, and we're not using the hardware to its full capability. And now that hardware is getting so fast and really the capabilities are there, we should use that as much as possible. Memory utilization as well. I know a lot of services will say they need 2 gigs of memory or 6 gigs of memory to run, but only end up using a couple hundred megs. And then they just hold that memory out there for certain times. Well, using virtualization, you can really optimize how much memory is being used on all of the systems at once. Legacy system support is really, really important. I'm sure people have that Windows 95 computer that's running some certain piece of software. You can't patch it, but it's having problems. But you can't get rid of it. It's running something important like door entrance software that lets you into a building, or some certain database application or whatever. Those systems you have to maintain, but finding hardware to refresh when hardware dies is really a problem. I mean, how do you get hardware drivers for a brand new dual core machine for Windows 95, which is not supported anymore. So virtualization can help solve some of those problems too. Transportation and encapsulation. This is really core to what virtualization gives you as a benefit. The really nice thing about virtualization is it wraps up and basically shrink wraps the operating system into a place where you can move it, transport it between physical machines. And so you don't have to worry about, well, this piece of hardware is slightly different than that piece of hardware, especially for disaster recovery. You can move computers from hardware to hardware, move around, and you don't have to worry about those hardware limitations. High availability. You get, depending on the virtualization technology you move forward with, high availability is great. You can have 2 machines running in a cluster, and if one physical piece of hardware fails, the virtual machine can move in between the physical pieces of hardware. So even a hardware failure, you won't have any downtime, or limited downtime depending on what you're doing. Better use of clustering. Clustering, a lot of times, we hesitate to buy, especially in limited budgets, separate hardware, dedicated hardware for a clustered machine. We want the redundancy of having 2 machines in a cluster, but we just can't justify the expense of spending another $5,000 on a dedicated host that sits there and does nothing, except waits for downtime. So using virtualization, you can basically carve out a small piece of resources on a machine and put your cluster, your passive cluster sitting there waiting to do nothing, or to pick up when there's a problem. But it's not really sharing resources. And so there's no real incremental cost to do that. And the other thing is flexibility. Upgrading hardware independent of upgrading the actual machine. So for legacy systems, for even existing systems that you don't need to change that DNS server, it's running great, you don't want to refresh the operating system, and everything's running perfectly, but that hardware is 5 years old and it needs to be refreshed. It's not under warranty anymore and it's really important to you. You have the option to just get rid of the hardware, replace the hardware, and you're not changing the system itself. So, case study for UC Davis. We started looking at virtualization about 3 years ago, trying to figure out how we could use it to reduce our costs and to really streamline the things that we were doing. And so we did a side-by-side comparison at the time between Microsoft's virtualization, VMware, Zen, and we decided to go with VMware's offering. For us, at the time, it made the most sense. I think it still makes the most sense today. It had better hardware, better support for different operating systems. The live motion, moving virtual machines between hosts, was fully available, and it was not available at the time on Windows platform. And they really did have just some really nice features. Full 64-bit support for guest OSs, and so at the time, it was the right choice for us. So we chose VMware and spent about a year planning deployment, identifying machines that made the most sense to be virtualized, and then move forward with acquiring hardware and actually implementing. VMware has 3 different flavors of their infrastructure. You've heard of VMware ESXi, which is their free version, but their paid offerings are Foundation, Standard, and Enterprise. And so we went with the Enterprise solution because vMotion was important to us. We wanted to be able to say, hey, if we've got down, we want to pull a server down for hardware maintenance or whatever, vMotion allows you to move a virtual machine, take a snapshot of the memory state of it, and move it between physical servers without losing memory, without losing transaction processing. And so you can even, it's the best way to demonstrate is to do a ping of the server, and you can physically move it from one piece of hardware to another, and you drop one ping. So there's no interruption to service, and web servers don't see any hit at all, and it's really a nice way to move things between servers And so that was really important to us. We didn't want to have downtime when, just because we had to patch an OS, the core OS on the ESX box. DRS is really nice too. Basically, you can throw all your virtual machines at the ESX cluster and say, I want you to figure out where the best place is for them. So if you've got 4 physical hosts, 4 physical servers running, and 25 virtual machines, the system will automatically figure out the best placement for each virtual machine to dynamically balance the load across the entire cluster. And then if one machine decides that, hey, I need a whole bunch of resources right now, it'll automatically shuffle everything around to give the best performance. So those options are important to us. We want an enterprise. There's also another piece of software that VMware has, which is the Virtual Center. It's been rebranded a couple of different names, but Virtual Center, vCenter, vSphere Center. But basically the idea is that it's the brains of the operation. You have your VMware cluster set up with all of your ESX hosts talking to each other, and then Virtual Center can direct the ESX hosts. So if you're not comfortable with Linux or Unix flavored environments, this gives you a really nice GUI to manage the entire system. So as you're managing your different VMware ESX hosts, which is basically a Linux OS, you can use this GUI environment on a Windows server to control how everything talks to each other. It also gives you the ability to interrogate a specific machine, find out the performance of it, look at how much memory utilization, CPU utilization, and also control and deploy templated machines, deploy new virtual machines into the infrastructure. So it has a lot of flexibility and scalability. That's also the piece of equipment that does the automation for DRS. So just to give you a kind of a brief overview of what it looks like, you've got the Virtual Center computer that manages all of the virtual machines and the ESX hosts. The ESX hosts are your bare metal that are running the ESX operating system, and then all of your virtual machines live on top of that. And we just abstract, so the virtual machine can be a Red Hat host, it could be Linux, it could be Windows, whatever flavor operating system you're interested in. So our environment, we chose to go with 3 Dell 2950s, brand new dual quad cores. And the idea here is that you pay per socket for licensing. So you want to get the most processing you can on each individual socket. VMware charges per socket, so actually you get a 2-socket license with your base purchase. So we wanted 2 sockets on that box with as much processing power as possible. And the one big thing you run into with virtualization is not the utilization of processing power, it's actually memory. A lot of Windows 2008 servers now require 2 gigs, 4 gigs of memory. So that really chews up the amount of virtual machines you can have on a physical host. And even if your CPU utilization is 5%, when you're looking at 80% memory utilization, you can't do a whole lot more with blocks. So we went with 16 gigabytes of RAM. That for us was the cost break to add. I think the server itself was somewhere in the neighborhood of $6,000, and to add 32 gigs of RAM would have cost $10,000 for the server. So there was a good cost break there. We said, hey, today we need 16 gigs of RAM, and that works well for us. But moving forward, if 2 years from now we decide that, hey, our servers just really don't have enough capacity, the price of memory will come down, we can purchase that afterwards. The one Dell 1950 is the Virtual Center machine. So you have to have a dedicated piece of hardware to run Virtual Center. And 4 gigs of RAM is more than sufficient to do that. We chose to do a Dell ND3000 iSCSI storage array. So that's how, basically is all of the data storage for the entire cluster. We use VMware's clustered file system on the storage array so all of the servers can see the same storage at the same time. That allows you to move virtual machines. The virtual machines physically live in the iSCSI SAN and can get mounted on each of the ESX hosts as you need to. And then gigabit Ethernet switches to connect it. So that's how our infrastructure looks right now. We've got our cloud coming into our VLAN firewall, and then each of the ESX hosts has a network connection to our public intranet. And then we have a private network that allows the VMware communications. So we try to keep that off of the public network. And we also have, and I I did this for simplicity just to show you how the two switches provide redundant paths. So you've got two network paths back to the storage array. You can lose a switch and still have connectivity. I don't want forgetting that noise. But there's actually a number of internet Ethernet connections on each server. Each server has, I think, 8 Ethernet connections on it. And that provides multiple pathways, network teaming to do higher bandwidth for each server. So instead of getting 1 gigabit connection, you're getting 2 gigabit connections across the network. And so each server has a connection to talk amongst each other and with the virtual center machine, as well as back to the X50 storage. So we initially looked at 12 of our servers, our physical servers, for consolidation. We said that we had a bunch of web, file, print servers, and a couple application servers that we really wanted to virtualize. We didn't want to look at SQL and Exchange. Things that are high I/O intensive really aren't the best candidates for virtualization, and there's a mixed opinions now. Some people say Exchange works great in virtualized environments, some people say no. For us, getting our feet wet with virtualization, it did make sense to do things that we thought were 100% critical to the organization and had high I/O, especially talking with the data store and having everything run across the same iSCSI network. So we initially started out with 12 machines. We used some physical to virtual conversions, which basically takes your physical machine and it sucks it into the virtual infrastructure. The process can take anywhere from 5 minutes to about an hour, depending on your data storage size. And it just basically goes, in 1 second you've got your physical machine, you turn that off, turn on the virtual machine in the infrastructure, and you're ready to go. So the actual conversion process is relatively seamless. We now have about 24 machines running in our virtual infrastructure. You'll see as you start doing virtualization, it's really easy to deploy a new virtual machine. And so you get a little bit of machine creep. So what we tried to do was say, before we had that DNS, DHCP file server out there, and everything was consolidated on one piece of hardware. And we said, hey, really these things should be separated out. Each server should have its own dedicated function. So we've begun doing that and trying to keep the number of virtual machines we manage low while still separating out services. This just shows you that the VMware, the physical to virtual conversion process, we had a mix of actual VMware server running on a Windows server box with a couple of virtual machines running there for testing, and you can bring those in relatively easily. You can also connect to a physical machine, you can suck that into your virtual environment as a virtual machine, and there's even some third-party stuff that you can do too. We didn't have anything really complex, but we did have a couple of virtual machines that existed already and some physical machines that brought it. So before we did our virtualization project, we were getting about 5% utilization on the box and 25% memory. The boxes were old hardware, and this probably makes more sense too. Our hardware was aging, and so we were at a point where we either needed to not forklift everything, but really take a look at how much hardware we were going to replace this year, or do we do virtualization? So we were going to have a huge outlay of cost for hardware anyway. And so do we replace 7 servers this year and do everything we've been doing the same way, or do we do virtualization and kind of think forward? So the reason that those numbers are high is because they were on old machines with maybe 1 gig of RAM or 2 gigs of RAM, and penny board, penny freeze. So after the conversion process, we went to 10% utilization across the servers and 40% memory, with 16 gigs in each box. And that's on 2 of our hosts. So I taxed out 2 of the hosts thinking that if we have a physical hardware failure on one host, what would our system look like? So that anytime there's a problem with the system, I want to know what our maximum capacity is going to be. So we're planning it for a failure of one host always. We don't want to get to a part where we've got 90% memory utilization on all 3 hosts, because then you lose the benefits of all disaster recovery and the high availability of the system. So we got much better than a 12-to-1 consolidation ratio. So we had some problems. they're not unsurmountable problems, but we did have some problems. The biggest thing we had was, one of the biggest ones, but we had a problem with our private network. The ESX hosts themselves don't talk out to the world. They can only talk in the private network. And we did that to isolate them. We don't want any problems with ESX moving over into our public network. And so we created a private VLAN for that traffic. But that private traffic then doesn't allow time server messaging across the network. So our physical boxes have problems with keeping time. We think this is probably really simple by just doing a route through the VLAN, the private VLAN, out to the public VLAN to get timing. We haven't done it yet, but it's just something doable. Tagging was interesting. We have a couple of different subnets that we run for our servers, one for a DMZ and one for a secure zone, but we don't allow traffic from the outside to, only our clients have access. And so doing multiple tagging across the virtual switching was interesting, but it works out really slick. And so we trunk traffic from the public network into each ESX box, and the ESX box does the VLAN tagging and provides the separate dedicated networks to each host, depending on how the games work. The reason we also bought 3 hosts up front was there is a problem with VMware on doing vMotion across different steps of Intel CPUs. So that was something to be aware of when we went forward with our purchase. And so instead of buying 2 servers up front and saying we'll add a 3rd later, we bought 3 up front just to alleviate the problem. So our cost for this system, 3 servers plus the virtual center server and the SAN and everything was about $45,000 in hardware. And it seems like a lot of money up front to outlay, but we were going to have to do that money anyway. We're going to have to buy new hardware for our system, and so it was, do we pay hardware for a system that's going to, again, get refreshed in 3 years and only have those 7 machines, or do we want to think bigger and see how we can grow in the future? The software itself for VMware was about $10,000, and that included the first year of support. Windows Data Center 2008 software licensing is great. I'll talk about that in a second. But we bought data center licenses for each of the 3 ESX hosts, and that provided all of the Windows licensing we needed. And then we spent about $15,000 in training to bring someone on site, give a 1-week training class to all of my staff, get everybody up to speed, do a little jump start, make sure everyone was trained. And then ongoing support is about $2,000 a year for all 4 licenses, the 3 ESX hosts, and then the VMware server, or sorry, the virtual center. If you're not familiar with Windows licensing for data center, this is awesome. We've got 24 Windows hosts, or sorry, Windows virtual machines running right now. And in a normal licensing, you'd have to buy a Windows license for each one of those. But if you license the base server with data center, you get all instances of virtual operating systems for free. So any subsequent virtual machines running on that host are completely licensed. So it's a great way if you're going to do a lot of Windows hosts on a virtual system to buy data center. Just an overview of the VMware support. We chose VMware Gold, which gives us 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. I try not to work weekends if I don't have to. If you have to go in on a weekday, you can call them and you can do a one-off and you can pay them for it. But this has worked really well for us. We haven't had any significant problems where we needed to get in there at 3 o'clock on a Sunday. And their support has been absolutely phenomenal. Really, really great. So moving forward, just things that we're thinking about going forward is adding more memory to the servers. We've got 16 gigs in each box right now, which is a physical limitation for us. And we're going to add another 16 gigs to each server, so basically double our capacity. And we want to make sure that we don't continue to have machine sprawl. So you can quickly, you start doing dev boxes and you don't have physical hardware to worry about anymore, and the Windows licensing is already taken care of. The next thing you know, you've got 50 virtual machines and you can't figure out what they're doing. So that's something to just pay attention to and to think about as you're doing virtualization. And then patching and restarting. The one interesting thing we did find was that you cannot do Windows patching and restarting on every single virtual machine at the same time. That is when the machine uses the most CPU. lifecycle, starting up and shutting down. And so we found out the hard way that if you try to do 24 machines at one time in the cluster, it just stops working. So it's something going forward. Now we're going to move on to some advanced topics.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the advanced topics, and then building on everything else we talked about. And a couple of them are guest OS running native backup clients. How do we back up all these machines? Do you have a backup client running on it locally as you would in a real environment? Do you look at point-in-time virtual machine snapshots or asynchronous replication? And what this virtualization encapsulation gives you is you suddenly have the entire OS, and it actually is just 10 files in a file system. So suddenly we can do a lot more creative ways of backing up data. And we can take point-in-time snapshots. VMware is excellent at working with the guest OS, setting a VSS command to quiesce data, whatever it needs to do, and then take a background snapshot. So the operating system that's running, your DNS server, your Exchange server, just knows that it's been in a backup command, it does it, and it's done, and it moves on, and it doesn't even know that we're going to back it up now. So it's basically bringing what we've been doing in the storage world for a long time with the off-server backups, offloading the backups using the SAN infrastructure. We can do that now at a virtualization layer also. And it can just do the software backup, and you're backing up a running machine in a steady state. And once you get that, you can then go and look at, well, we can now transport this encapsulated server anywhere. Our disaster recovery suddenly can be 100 times easier. What if I could put all of my running virtual machines, my entire environment, on one USB drive and then put that off in a safe site? We've got our daily backups, they're going off to Iron Mountain, they're going off wherever. But what if I could get my entire environment on a USB drive? If I need it, I can start up one virtualization server, I can put all those files on it, and suddenly all 24 virtual machines are up and running in the time it takes to copy a terabyte of data. So suddenly you've got great new ability to do fast and reasonable disaster recovery, and managing it becomes much, much more simple, much easier. Reduced capacity and cost at DR site. When we talk about the virtualization ratio, he was able to achieve 12 to 1. Well, that's fine, but what about a DR site where you don't need 100% speed? You don't need everything running at 100% speed for that 3-4 days that you just have to get things back online. I can accept 60% capability of my DR site for 1 week. And if I can get everything online in 10, 20, 1 hour, 10, 20 minutes, or 1 hour, that's great because I can do all that with one machine. I don't need 4 hosts anymore. My DR site, I can have greatly reduced capacity and cost at the DR site. And DR is really about managing risk. You're managing risk and balancing that with the cost associated with managing that risk. And there are plenty of automated failover tools now that are leveraging all of these features. So you can get third-party tools. VMware SRM, Site Recovery Manager, is an automated tool for doing wide area clustered failover. So it will actually fail VMs over if there is a site outage. It will start all those VMs automatically for you. So there are a lot of third-party tools coming out that are going to build up upon this. And I know in the TechNoise mailing list there was a bit of talk, I think a month and a half ago, about what do we do about DR? Now, my data is safe in Iron Mountain, but how long does it take me to build all of the necessary servers to get the services back up and running? Well, this can solve that problem very quickly, very easily. Quick comparison. It's always interesting to try to compare the different offerings head to head. So in my little scenario, I've said I've got a mix of Windows and Unix that I need to virtualize. I need to consolidate down. This is a server consolidation project, highly available for production use. This is all production. I'm going to try to do this with 4 real servers, maxing out my CPUs, memory as best I can for my budget. And it's going to be about 30 virtual machines. Got academic pricing, and I want my 8x5 or 10x5 business hour support. Pricing comes out something like this. You know, Hyper-V, it's maybe $5,600 for that offering for software for doing this project. But you get per instance support because Microsoft support is different. VMware ESX, you're getting real corporate professional level support. It's a set offering. There's no per incident charges. You get your standard support. Standard does not have the vMotion, the live migration of OSs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in my case study and why I chose to not use the vMotion. So standard, you could get about $7,000, and that gives you 3 years of bundled support. And this is 8x5, no per incident charges. Advanced with vMotion and some other great features, $16,000. That's 3 years of support. Citrix Zen Enterprise is around $8,400. The Red Hat Virtualization is around $6,000. I'll discuss some of this in the next slide where we talk about, well, what are these different offerings? How do I choose? Well, when I started doing the features list, I quickly got to over 30. And that was just too many to put on a slide, obviously. What I think is the most important takeaway from this slide on features, you have to go into this project knowing what you need. There are so many features out there that you don't need, and there are some cases where you will slowly disqualify different products based on a feature you absolutely have to have, but is not provided. So the features and also the features, they change very fast. Most of the information for ESX is all current for 1 month ago. In April, 2 months ago, April, they changed the entire lineup. Zen changed the lineup 4 months ago. So this stuff is changing very fast. Hyper-V is about to get a refresh. It's going to change completely. And so the features are constantly changing, constantly coming up with new stuff. Some of it's marketing hype, some of it is really, really important stuff. So you've got to go into this first knowing exactly what you have to have. And then support, there are different levels of support. You know, Microsoft is Microsoft. They can solve any problem eventually. It might take a couple weeks. You may have to go through 5 different levels of support. Who knows what might come of that. VMware and Citrix have real corporate level support, professional support, where you open a ticket and they don't get off the phone unless it's solved, or you're agreeing to presume the troubleshooting tomorrow. And they will solve those problems. Red Hat is really good at support, but they have a much different structure. They aren't the sole owner of what they are providing support for. So some cases, they may not be able to solve directly. So it's an important thing to look at the support you need for your production environment. What about free? I like free. That's what I chose. But nothing's really free, and we'll talk about that in my case today, where I'm still spending some money, but not much. We do have free offerings from all of these 4 providers. And you've got to look through and see what you're getting. It's great that Citrix Zen, they give you the live migration for free. You don't have to do anything. You can just download as many copies as you want, put it on real servers, and you get that right out the door. But there are other limitations. Their snapshot is only forward snapshotting. You can take a snapshot of this running DNS server, this running Exchange server, and then apply your system upgrade. You got to apply a big system batch to an Exchange server. So you take it offline. You got your planned service maintenance outage. You take the service offline. You do a snapshot. You then apply the patch, and it fails miserably. How do you roll back? It's a very long process with some of these. With ESXi, you just open, roll back this one, and you're done. You can reapply it. You can try 4 or 5 times. You can do multiple branches of snapshots. So if you look at the features, these products really differentiate themselves, and in many cases, they will quickly disqualify themselves for certain features that you really must have. So I'm about 3 months into a virtualization project. We have about 30 key services, including email, file sharing, printing, all the usual stuff. But we've got about 30 key services, and I've identified 20 that I want to virtualize in the course of the next year. And my goals are that I have to use existing budget. We have a yearly allotment for refresh of hardware and new software acquisition. So I have to stay within an existing budget that's already been set for me. So I can't say that I want to go out and get a brand new budget of $50,000 to do all this stuff. I have an existing budget that I have to work within, the repurpose of existing hardware. We have a lot of good servers. They're old, There are a lot of dual core, or even in some cases single core, but they're real servers. They have a per controller card with rated drives for the OS, and they're fiber channel attached, and we have a good SAN infrastructure. So I would like to repurpose whatever hardware I can. And also I want to increase service reliability. My key services that I'm offering to my community, we don't have a lot of high availability in that we're not using clustering today. Even though our Novell licensing and Windows licensing offer it virtually for free with almost every installed OS we're running today, we could get clustering and would not have to pay for it. So I want more virtual machines. I want to take these 20 servers, make 40 virtual machines, and have everything clustered, so I can increase service reliability and availability. And I've got a couple legacy hosts. There's 2 hosts. They're running software we can't reinstall on any other OS. They're stuck where they are, and I need to just suck them up and put them in a better environment where I can support them, because their hardware is beyond out of support. It's 2-3 years out of support. So I need to do that. And what I came up with was, I chose the free ESXi for a couple reasons. I'll go back to the features and just outline what I chose that for. We've got a SAN infrastructure already. I was able to cobble together 6 hosts that I could use in an infrastructure like this. You can see we've got some dual cores around. We've got 1 quad core. Most of our servers have too little RAM. So what I've done is I've gone out and I've increased RAM on everything to at least 8 gigs. And I'm setting up my virtual machines so that I'm not doing more than a 4-to-1 virtualization ratio, because I don't have a lot of RAM. And that's going to be a somewhat of a limitation. But I've got an excellent SAN infrastructure, so all my data is highly available and it's excellent performance. So I can rely on that for to make up some of the performance limitations that I have in my servers. I want to go back to, just quickly, if I look at ESXi, when I went through my project, I said, well, I've got to have legacy support. Hyper-V dropped out immediately. I couldn't run this really old version of Red Hat on our information repository. And I can't reinstall the software on any other OS. It's just not supported. So Hyper-V was a great product, great licensing for campus licensing, but it's disqualified. Citrix Zen was an excellent offering. It even gave me the live migration, but the hardware that I have is too dissimilar. And what Jamie had talked about with his infrastructure planning, he got 3 identical servers day 1. And that's a great forward-thinking mindset, because the live migration works in most cases without any additional configuration if you have exactly the same hardware. It can be made to work correctly in almost any dissimilar hardware situation, but the more dissimilar, the more varied, the more time you're going to spend on it. And as we looked at my hardware, it's pretty old, very varied, and it would take a long time to make that work in my environment. Also, I am going to use clustering. I'm going to use operating system clustering. The live motion is not a necessity for me. If I have a service outage because hardware fails, the alternate cluster nodes are on different hardware. They will resume that service. They will continue that service without interruption. So live migration was not a necessity. Guest OS support was there. Snapshots were great. Works great in the lab too, because you can take a lab environment where you're doing a lot of snapshots. We did a full test of our group-wise email system upgrade from version 7 to version 8, 6 hosts. We snapshotted everything, put it in a test environment, and upgraded it 2 times successfully. Before we did it in production, it worked flawlessly. We upgraded all 6 hosts in less than 3 hours of service, planned maintenance for service, and there have been no issues. We were able to do all of our testing with snapshots, and that made the actual work effortless. Pretty much wrapped it up. We don't have a QA slide to it. Well, we wanted to open it up for QA at this point.
Have either of you virtualized any of your domain controllers?
I have. We have 1 on bare metal and 1 virtualized. And the reason for that was if the room catches fire, I've got a backup domain controller and a virtualization. And that's shipped off to a DR site so I can be up and running right away. And I don't notice any performance problems with it. It's running, they're both answering requests seems to work just great.
What version of ESX are you on?
I have 3.5.
And I've deployed 4.0.
Did you do a clean install for 4.0? Did you try to migrate from 3.5?
I tried to upgrade my 3.5 to 4.0, and it didn't take immediately, so I just wiped it. All the data was on SAN, so there was nothing to preserve. Yeah.
Right.
For your DR, you showed your diagram of your servers and your SAN and all that. Is that all sitting in one rack in one room?
Yes.
So if that rack catches fire,
Yep.
you're getting tapes in and starting to rebuild your hardware.
No, that whole, so I didn't show my disaster recovery scenario. I have a backup server that does all my file-level backups, and it's also configured as, VMware calls it a VCB, VMware Consolidated Backup. And what that does is it takes a snapshot of the virtual machine. There's a proxy host, which is my backup server, which then issues the command to create the snapshot, goes into the iSCSI storage, and copies that entire virtual machine file over to a remote location and sits on storage. And so the only thing I have to do is bring up another ESX host in the disaster recovery location, which my campus has actually done for me. So the campus has a VMware infrastructure already set up. I just have to drop those files into their cluster and say start, and I'm online.
And how do you create redundancy with your backup, with your data storage? Does everything else on your map look like it had redundancy built in? And I've gotten burned by having issues with my my SAN. And it's back to what you said, it would take forever to get that thing back up.
Yeah, so if the SAN itself goes down, then we've got problems. We'll have to go to DR essentially. The idea with that would be we drop a new SAN in place. We've got 4-hour support from Dell. If my SAN goes off, I'm going to fork it, and I'm going to bring in a new one, drop it in place, and copy the data back to it. So we'll be down for, it's again like he was saying, mitigating risk or doing the risk. For us, I think if we're down for a day because the building catches fire, my dean's going to be okay with that, as long as we're not losing data and we can restore services. People will be more concerned about the building catching fire. So that's our cost benefit there.
How are you managing you mentioned you're using ESXi.
That's correct.
Okay, which is what we're experimenting with at Emory. How are you managing, I'm mostly interested in Linux to Linux stuff. Are you using like Stoneup and DRB or something like that? So you're within, when one of your nodes goes down, can you spend a minute and tell us how the other node picks up?
Well, we're specifically we're a Novell shop, so we're using SUSE, and SUSE with OES2 has clustering, so we're using the Novell clustering service. So it's a fully automated failover, and it's a Novell clustering service is a premium supported clustering offering. So I'm not using any of the free HA stuff right now, but specifically for my file server, when I created the cluster with 2 nodes, it's merely, they're doing a heartbeat, they're doing a check continuously, and when one node goes offline, the other starts going through its startup process, and it takes ownership of the actual volume, and they have, since we've got the SAN storage, the data volume is always available to all nodes, and it's merely an OS level, and so specifically a Novell cluster service is the arbitrator of who is going to access that data at any one time. And so by service, you always have active passive. It's not an all active scenario.
Which P2V solutions would you use?
I used the VMware PV stuff directly with the Virtual Center server.
I've used that, and I've also used the Zen one.
And to follow up on that, the plate spin products, it used to be called plate spin power convert, and they've changed the name a little bit. All of the plate spin products are absolutely amazing, but they're expensive. If you can find a line item on your budget to pick those up, it will save you time. The same thing that you'll get from the plate spin product, they have, the products they use do the exact same thing. The plate spin stuff will do it about half the time, is what I found. But now that I'm out of law school at State University, can't afford it. So I'm doing what they're
Well,
doing.
and PlateSpin actually does above and beyond that. They have automated resource management through this P2V and then back to physical. So it's a very much a higher level automation tool, and it's really a compelling offering, but quite expensive.
Yes. I think following up on the P2V thing, P2V is great if you want to quickly jump from a physical environment into a virtual environment, but it's no substitute from rebuilding from scratch a new OS and then transferring a service to it. And so what we did for our environment was suck everything in initially and then begin going through systematically rebuilding services and servers and porting services over to each new server. And that way we're not be cleaning things up when we suck in the physical, but you're not going to have all the additional stuff that you need, all the little drivers, cover drivers, all that stuff, and you can separate services out a little better.
And specifically in my case, I'm only using the P2V where I have legacy systems that I can't reinstall, but I'm also taking this opportunity to actually reinstall and redeploy all services. And that's really necessary because I'm going into a clustered environment. You just got to set that up from the beginning, or else you can't just pull something in and turn on clustering. It's just not practical.
We're pretty early in our VM project, and it seems like VMware is our leading candidate at this point. One thing that worries me is seeing that $15,000 budget line for training. Can you talk a little bit about the learning curve for VMware?
Sure. For us, it made the most sense. We spent $15,000 and brought somebody in, and they did it. It's called a jumpstart. And so we had them come in. We set up all of the equipment in our rack, and they literally showed us how to install VMware on our gear. And so that was a really nice way to get familiar with it, because we sat next to the person who's has 10 years of VMware experience or whatever, and literally sitting over their shoulder and doing commands and learning how everything happens. And when you encounter a problem, troubleshooting it together and figuring out how everything works. And they did that for my entire staff. So I had everybody in the server room plugging away, and everybody left the training for 5 days feeling super comfortable with doing their own physical virtual conversions, setting up new machines, doing templates, and just managing everything. There was still training that, just learning we had to do above and beyond that afterwards, but we had a good base. And I think in order to get that for 5 people, my organization would have cost way more than $15,000. But if you only have 1 or 2 people, it may make sense to do training off-site instead of just someplace else. But it was really great to say, here's the gear, and next week we've got VMware. And we had 12 machines that were on our virtualized. So it was just, for us, it made sense.
What's your replacement cycle?
We're on a 4-year hardware replacement cycle now. So we've gone from about 15 or 16 physical servers down to 6, and a 4-year replacement cycle. So we're saving lots of money on hardware. We had up in a 3-year replacement cycle, and now with budget for 4-year, just upping the long-term.
Talk about going with the Windows 2008 Data Center just for licensing costs. Do you get all the features in Data Center that you would get with any other like enterprise or?
Data Center's cool in that I'm not sure, most places probably have the Microsoft Campus Agreement. Are you familiar with that? So with Campus Agreement, you get not only the product, but you get software assurance. And software assurance enables you to downgrade rights to any other OS. So if you install Windows 2008 if you buy the license for Windows 2008 Data Center, your license not only for Data Center, but also for Enterprise and for Standard, and for 2008, 2003, 2000. So you can install any flavor of Windows Server you want on that box. It doesn't substitute CALs. You still have to get the client access licenses, but the actual server OS.
You talked earlier about clustering. You're now running version 4 of vSphere, right? Are you guys going to do anything with that new, was it the shadow copy thing? Instead of the cluster, actually have that underlying VM that's like hidden, that if the one drops, it picks it up on another host. It's not like HA, but it's actual clustering built into vSphere. You guys looking at that at all, or?
I thought that was for the vSphere management, now has an HA component. And that's really expensive. It's charging a lot for it, but your vCenter server can now be an HA cluster. That's actually provided with the basic version of Zen, but no, we're not doing that actually. Since I'm going with ESXi, and I'm going to do it as cheap as possible, I'm actually not running a vCenter server for total management. We're doing one instance management just using the vSphere client, which is fine because we only need it for initial provisioning of one of our cluster nodes. And after that, then we're using our cluster tools and our OS tools to do everything, and we almost never go back to the hypervisor management tools because we're not using dynamic resource management, so it's not dynamically load balancing for us, but that's fine with us. We don't need that. And in the future, we may move towards that, but at this time, it just isn't, it's not necessary, and so we're just skipping that part.
Last week, I'm from the University of Kentucky, Lexington, and I went to Louisville to a vSphere 4 launch event, and so all the VMware guys were there, some of the Dell guys, sharing with us a lot of the new features in the enterprise version of vSphere 4, and they told us that there is a promotional pricing out there, so that if anyone is currently on, the third generation of VMware ESX virtual infrastructure, it's normally like $34.95, like $3,400 to buy a processor core license for this new product, this new vSphere 4. But if you're upgrading from 3 to 5 or something like that, it's only $795, and that's available till December 15th, I think they said. So if you're thinking about upgrading, maybe keep that December 15th deadline in your mind. So, maybe move a little faster and save thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and then I'll follow that up with vSphere 4, the new launch from VMware in April. They radically changed all of their licensing. So if you're an existing customer, definitely go find your sales rep and find out what that means for you moving forward, because they have to migrate all your licensing into the new model.
We use Zen, and I don't know anything about virtualization other than what I learned today. But I know that one of the products that we'd love to virtualize is certified by the vendor for VMware and not for Zen. How often do you run into apps that are not really available for virtualization, and you just go ahead with them anyway and see if they work?
So one example is I was working with another group who wanted to run Exchange and virtualization, but this was 2-3 years ago when they first did this, and it wasn't supported by Microsoft. So they ran an Exchange cluster, one on a real, one on a virtualized ESX cluster of 7 ESX servers. And if they ever needed to get support, they would fail to cluster over the real machine and then call Microsoft. And they didn't have any problem with support issues. That always worked. Now it's actually fully supported by Microsoft. They do support Exchange in a virtualized environment. That is always an issue. VMware generally gets supported first because it's got the greatest market share. But I can't imagine anybody's not going to support virtualization moving forward. It is just too entrenched in our environments, our infrastructure these days. But there are creative solutions around that.
Along the same lines, I was going to kind of ask the community, is anybody virtualizing Banner? I know Banner's kind of saying don't do it, but we're running it on HP. You've done it?
Well, we're testing it.
On Linux?
Yeah, on Linux, yeah. We have to upgrade by next year, and we're testing it now. In Red Hat.
Okay.
Data's on SAN, VM's on SAN. So, yeah, we're doing it.
We're talking about, we had to move too off of HPUX, and so we're talking about trying that. I just wonder, because I know Banner folks say don't do it, right?
Well, we're getting a different, they're telling us something different. At least I'm not in that group, but I've been in the meetings and listened to them talk about it. They say that Banner is doing development in Red Hat, and they say there's no reason why you can't do it. They do it in testing. But it's just like you guys are alluding to, it's like it's going that way. To say that it's not, you got your head in the sand. So we're probably going to wind up doing it that way.
I'll actually follow that up with, there's an interesting excerpt from Microsoft's official release notes about the pre-Hyper-V 2008. free version that's just the hypervisor, and it specifically omits production as a viable use for the free version. So if you look at their documentation, they are not explicitly recommending you run production in the free Hyper-V. So there's a lot of interesting support issues out there.
I had a question for people who are in Windows shops. Is anyone running terminal services in the terminal services server in a virtualized environment?
Yes.
Yeah, we
And
are.
works? Everybody's
Absolutely,
okay
it
with
works
it?
great.
Okay.
We haven't, I don't have 50 people hitting it at once.
I'm thinking OPAC terminal.
We use it for, basically for application-specific things.
We're going to, so I hope it works.
When you did it, did you apply more resources to your terminal server? Because by far my terminal server uses more resources than any other server.
I haven't noticed any problems with it. The nice thing about VMware is you can dedicate CPU clock cycle and memory to a box, or you can share memory across the machine. So you can oversubscribe memory, which is kind of cool. If you have a server that requires 2 gigs and you've only got 8 gigs in the box, physically you've only be able to put 4 servers, but you can oversubscribe the memory even though it's not recommended. So that way you can get more of a virtuals on a machine even if they're not using that much memory. But yeah, I haven't seen any problems with the performance.
We had we just recently, well, we're doing registration now. We had 5 sessions of registration in June. And I took a terminal server that usually has maybe like 2 people running it, using it. I think I had 512 meg in it. I shut it down, boosted up to 4 or 3.5 gig, and then I run 40 RDC sessions on it. It's basically like a kiosk. It's only like we're just hitting a banner on a web page on 40 of these sessions, and it was working great. We've got a lab actually with 16 thin clients that works better than standalone workstations.
Well, and it's really because you can oversubscribe, but what you're doing really is you're consolidating resources so that they're available on demand. The virtual machines now, the guest operating systems can be given 4 virtual CPUs so they can use as little or as much as they want, and you can put that on something that's only got 8 cores. And as long as you've either got the add-on applications that are doing that dynamic resource reallocation, or if you're just planning ahead and you know registration's coming up and so we'll move 2 other services over onto this other physical hardware, you can manage that. And most of these, if not, well, most everything free even provides active alerting and notification when resources are being strained so that you can go proactively take action.
Is there an auto allocation process based on which one is getting more incremental resources?
With DRS, you can set priorities. So you can say this machine is my domain controller and I absolutely need it to be up, and it gets priority over everything else. You can also set restrictions so that this machine physically has this much CPU cycle and this much memory and nobody else can touch it.
So you have never had any problems, more machines trying to get resources at the same time and trying to crash the system?
We haven't, but we over-planned our infrastructures that we have more hardware than we physically needed today, actually, or even a year ago.
Even at the highest load level, you could expect.
The only time we've ever had problems is when we've tried to bounce every single machine at the same time after a hardware, after a software patch. Don't do that. It taxes the machine. Every single virtual machine is vying for CPU time, and DRS works just fine as long as there's someplace else to put the machine. But if everything is taxing the CPU, they can't move it around. So it just like crawls.
So what's critical in the VM besides your domain controller? Because you said exchanges off and the SQL's off.
Exchanges off, SQL's off.
Application server.
Application servers, file, print, web. So our main web server got priority, our domain controllers got priority, and our file server has priority. And a lot of the application server does that as consider.
What do you guys do with DNS and DHCP?
They're all virtualized.
All virtualized?
Mine are centrally managed by the university. So.
All right, so you don't have to worry about it.
No, I just have to fight with it, so.
You worry about it all the time.
Worry about it. I can't view 2/3 of the static IPs in my net block half the time, so.
So there's that.
There's that, yeah.
I would love to virtualize everything. I think the benefits for disaster recovery just outweigh a lot of the other problems that we have. The ability to pick up your entire organization and send it there is really powerful. I just don't think we're there yet for Exchange and flexing the hardware at the support.
On the hardware, would you recommend multiple network interfaces? I mean, if you've got a lot of virtual machines, latency is probably going to go up if you've got
We have
lots of requests.
We have 8 NICs in every single ESX host.
Using all 8?
Yeah. So we use one dedicated for heartbeat between ESX. We use 2 to each network switch for SAN connectivity, and that would do NIC teaming and get double the throughput across the SAN. And we use 2 backup to the public LAN, and they're both trunks, so we get both VLANs across both NICs. So that's team 2.
And doing the TCP offload engine for the iSCSI connections is also a benefit, and usually a minimal cost in the server config for the TOE.
So you said if you're doing multiple, you have to bring it up on a different terms. Would that have the same hardware that you have? So that's much for the team.
Yeah, we'd have to do some configuration with getting we'd have to route our VLAN into their virtual infrastructure and do some stuff. There would be some setup.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I was like, it's not as easy as that.
It's not, you're right, it's not flip a switch, but I think it would be a matter of a couple hours of
Yeah,
setup.
that's very much about it.
Well, and it really, in real terms, it's not reinstalling the OS, it's
Yeah.
re-IPing it.
Yeah,
And, making sure that everything can still communicate. And if you are forward thinking when you set up DNS names, you can get around a lot of problems. Because your services can find themselves under new identities. And tools like the SRM, this Site Recovery Manager, is a way actually to automate that.
I was just going to say, the guys are absolutely right about SQL and Exchange. Exchange, some people may disagree, but it's a fancy SQL database with email in it. But they do a lot of the same stuff to your hardware. And if you think about exactly what's going on a very heavily utilized SQL machine, as far as disk I/O, what's happening in the memory and all that, it is possible to have a successful, very high-end SQL deployed in a virtualized environment, but you don't just treat it like any other, this is my DNS server, drop it on, because it has special requirements.
You almost want to just drop it on its own dedicated hardware, but virtualized, so you get the flexibility and the benefits of virtualization.